Today on TimesCast, a suicide bomber kills Kabul's lead negotiator with the Taliban. Troy Davis, an inmate facing the death penalty in Georgia, loses what appears to be his last attempt to avoid execution.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
And Roger Cohen on the diminished role of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
This is Ray Rivera with the New York Times Kabul Bureau. Burhanuddin Rabbani was killed today in his heavily guarded home in Kabul by a suicide bomber with explosives tucked in his turban. His death deals a devastating blow to peace and reintegration efforts with the Taliban. Professor Rabbani was chairman of the High Peace Council, a panel appointed by President Hamid Karzai to negotiate a political end to the war with the Taliban.
It's a sad day for us in Afghanistan, but a day of unity and a day of continuity of our efforts.
The assassination came as President Karzai was in New York meeting with President Obama before the start of the United Nations General Assembly. Mr. Rabbani's death is the latest in a string of high-profile assassinations. These include the July killings of President Hamid Karzai's half-brother, Ahmed Wali Karzai, and his confidant and close aide, John Mohammed Khan. These assassinations raise serious questions of whether a peace deal with the Taliban can ever be achieved. I traveled with Mr. Rabbani to his home province recently, where he was on a mission to urge warring factions to lay down their arms and join the reintegration process. But in the signal of the challenges that the Peace Council faces, few legitimate Taliban fighters have laid down their arms. His death comes just days after a handful of militants effectively shut down parts of the capital in a 20-hour siege as they fired rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns toward the U.S. Embassy and NATO headquarters. The attack was a military failure for the Taliban, but like today's assassination, it may prove a symbolic victory.
The controversy surrounding the impending execution of Troy Davis highlights the rift in national opinion over the death penalty.
We should be very clear that this is a civil rights violation and a human rights violation in the worst way.
I'm Kim Severson with the New York Times, reporting here in Atlanta, Georgia at the Ebenezer Baptist Church where Martin Luther King once preached. There was a press conference to discuss the case of Troy Davis. 20 years ago, Troy Davis was accused of killing a white Savannah police officer. He's convicted. He's faced the death penalty 4 times. The Georgia Board of Pardon and Parole today denied what appears to be his last chance at life. He'll be executed Wednesday at 7 p.m.
We are not going to be silent. We are going to continue to take action. We're continuing to ask people to demand that the Pardons and Parole Boards grant clemency.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
The case has garnered international attention. Jimmy Carter, Desmond Tutu, 50 members of Congress have weighed in, including people who support the death penalty. The issue is justice for many people, and also here in Atlanta, it's about race.
It's like we fought so hard. And what happened? What happened?
To quote Dr. Martin Luther King, while we're here in Ebenezer Church where he pastored, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
The physical evidence in the case is very shaky. It was a case built mostly on witness statements. Several of those witnesses have recanted. People have made the case that one of those witnesses was in fact the shooter. And the fact that all of this evidence is largely circumstantial and based on witness statements had a lot of people concerned about the airtightness of this case.
Certainly this case is about race, about people's pleas for justice, but it also points up the schism around death penalty politics in our country. And the same week that over 200,000 signatures were gathered through change.org to try to stop the execution of Troy Davis, an audience cheered Rick Perry for the number of executions that he's had in Texas when the issue was raised at a Republican candidates debate.
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president, rolls into New York this week for his annual appearance at the United Nations. There'll be a lot of attention, as usual, to what he says, but Ahmadinejad is a much reduced figure since his last appearance. He's contested at home, notably by the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and the clerical establishment, which have taken to mocking Ahmadinejad. He recently said that the 2 American hikers in Iran would be released, only to be overruled. He's also been reduced by the fact that the Arab Spring has occurred, and young Muslims throughout the region are not looking to Iran. I was in Iran in 2009 for the fiercely contested election, which brought 2 million plus Iranians out into the street to protest over their stolen votes. That movement was clearly an inspiration for the Arab Spring. And I think it's at that moment that Ahmadinejad really lost whatever aura he had, and since then has been a much diminished figure. In the end, we'll have to conclude, I think, that Ahmadinejad has been more of a celebrity, saying provocative things, vile things about Israel, about 9/11, but really holding his country in a kind of paralysis, ambivalence that has made Iran weaker over the years of his presidency.